She cracked 2 eggs into a cast iron skillet at 6 in the evening, and nobody in the house thought twice about it. In thousands of Mexican-American kitchens from the 1950s through the 1980s, eggs were not just for breakfast. They were the dinner that kept a family fed on nights when the budget was tight and time was short. A skillet of huevos con chipotle or a quick molite con huevo could fill you up for a fraction of what a pound of ground beef cost. Some of the dishes on this list were so common that nobody bothered writing them down. Others came from regions most cookbooks never covered. Number 9 involves a sauce so rich that people in Puebla served it at weddings. And number 6 uses an ingredient most younger cooks today would never think to pair with eggs. Here are 25 forgotten Mexican egg dinners for seniors living alone. So hit subscribe, because these deserve to be remembered. Number 25. Huevos con rajas. Roasted poblano strips and eggs. The poblanos went directly onto the open flame of a gas burner, or onto a dry comal, until the skin blistered and blackened on every side. Then they were dropped into a plastic bag or wrapped in a damp towel to steam until the charred skin slid off under running water. The peeled chiles were sliced into long, thin strips called rajas, and those strips went into a skillet with a little oil, sliced onion, and a splash of cream. When the cream began to bubble, the eggs were cracked in and scrambled gently through the tangle of soft, smoky pepper and sweet onion. In the neighborhoods of Puebla and across Mexican-American kitchens in Southern California, rajas con huevo was an evening meal that used whatever poblanos came home from the market that afternoon. The roasting was the entire secret. Raw poblano tastes sharp and vegetal, but fire transformed it into something deeper, almost sweet, with a smokiness that soaked into the eggs and made the whole plate taste like it had been cooked over a wood fire. Number 24. Huevos con quelites. Wild greens and eggs. Quelites were the edible weeds that grew along the edges of the milpa, the cornfield, between the rows of squash and bean, where nobody planted them and nobody watered them. Quintoniles, verdolagas de campo, cenizo, pápalo, whatever came up in that particular patch of Oaxacan or Pueblan soil. A handful was rinsed, chopped roughly, wilted in a hot skillet with garlic and a dried chile de árbol. And then the eggs went in, scrambled loosely through the greens until every fold of curd carried a streak of something bitter and wild. Mexican-American families in the Central Valley of California and in parts of New Mexico kept the habit alive by foraging lamb's quarters and pigweed from the edges of their own yards, plants that Anglo neighbors sprayed with weed killer. 2 eggs, a fistful of whatever grew free, and a stack of tortillas made a dinner that cost nothing and tasted like the land itself. Number 23. Huevos a la albañil. Bricklayers' eggs. The name came from the construction workers in Mexico City, who needed a fast, filling meal they could eat on a job site with nothing but a tortilla in their hands. Eggs scrambled directly into a thick, heavily spiced salsa, made from roasted tomatoes, serrano chiles, and garlic. The salsa was not a topping. It was the cooking medium. The eggs went into the bubbling sauce raw and were stirred through until they formed soft curds coated in red. The result was saucier and more intensely flavored than regular scrambled eggs, because every surface of the egg absorbed the chili and the char. In the working-class colonias of Mexico City and later in Mexican-American communities across Houston and Dallas, huevos a la albañil was a dinner that took 10 minutes, cost almost nothing, and left nobody hungry. Number 22. Huevos con huitlacoche. Corn smut. The gray-blue fungus that grows on ears of corn during the rainy season. In Mexico, huitlacoche has been prized for centuries as a delicacy with an earthy, mushroom-like flavor that nothing else in the kitchen can replicate. Sautéed with onion, garlic, and a little epazote until it turned soft and fragrant, then scrambled with eggs. It became a dinner plate that tasted complex and almost smoky without a single dried chile. Families in the corn-growing regions of Puebla, Tlaxcala, and the Mexican communities of the Central Valley in California cooked huitlacoche with eggs whenever the season brought it. The fungus was free if you grew your own corn, and many families did. Younger generations who never saw it growing on a stalk rarely seek it out, and the knowledge of when to harvest it and how to cook it down properly has quietly faded with the people who knew. Number 21. Huevos con charales. Dried lake fish and eggs. Charales were the tiny, silver fish pulled from the lakes of Michoacán and the Valley of Mexico, sun-dried until they turned stiff and translucent, then sold by the bagful in the mercado. To cook them for dinner, a handful was rinsed, patted dry, and fried in a little oil until they curled and crisped, then tossed with diced tomato, onion, serrano chile, and a squeeze of lime. The eggs went in last, scrambled through the crispy fish so every bite had a crunch of salt and lake against the softness of the curd. In the towns around Lake Pátzcuaro, charales con huevo was an ordinary Tuesday supper that stretched a small bag of dried fish into a full plate. The flavor was sharp and mineral, nothing like ocean fish, and families who moved north to Chicago and Detroit carried bags of charales in their suitcases because no American grocery store stocked them. Number 20. Huevos con chile pasado. Dried roasted chile and eggs. In the high desert of Chihuahua, green chiles were roasted over open flame, then hung on long strings in the dry wind until they shriveled into dark, leathery strips that could last through the winter without refrigeration. When dinner came, a few strips were rehydrated in warm water, torn into pieces, and sautéed with onion and garlic. The eggs scrambled through that smoky, concentrated chili had a depth of flavor that fresh peppers could never reach because the drying process locked in the roasted sugars and the dessert sun did something to the flesh that no oven could replicate. Families from the Chihuahua corridor who settled in El Paso and southern New Mexico brought the tradition of making chile pasado with them, and a bag hanging in the pantry meant that a rich, warming egg dinner was always 10 minutes away. Number 19. Huevos con flor de izote. Yucca blossoms and eggs. The izote is the tall, spiky yucca plant that grows across the drier regions of southern Mexico, Guatemala, and in the yards of Mexican-American families throughout the Southwest, who planted them as ornamentals without realizing the flowers were food. Every spring, the plant sends up a thick stalk crowned with clusters of white, waxy blossoms that taste faintly like artichoke hearts when cooked. The preparation required patience. The flowers were pulled from the stalk one by one, the bitter pistils removed from the center of each blossom, and the petals blanched in salted water to pull out any remaining bitterness. Then they went into a skillet with tomato, onion, and green chile, and eggs were scrambled through until the petals softened into silky ribbons threaded between curds of egg. In Oaxaca, Puebla, and across the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, flor de izote con huevo was a springtime dinner that appeared for only a few weeks each year when the plants bloomed. Families watched their izote stalks the way other families watched fruit trees, waiting for exactly the right moment when the flowers were open, but not yet past their prime. Picked them too early, and the flavor was flat. Too late, and they turned fibrous and tough. The dish traveled north with families from southern Mexico, who settled in Los Angeles, Houston, and the Gulf Coast towns of Texas, where izote plants grew in front yards and parking strips. But the knowledge that those dramatic white flowers were edible faded with each generation that grew up buying dinner at a store instead of picking it from the yard. The yucca plants still bloom every spring across the Southwest. The flowers still fall to the ground unpicked. Number 18. Huevos con flor de calabaza. Squash blossom eggs. The blossoms were picked in the early morning while they were still closed and dewy. The pistils pulled out, the petals rinsed gently because they bruised if you handled them rough. In a skillet with a little butter or oil, diced onion and a few strips of poblano went in first. Then the torn blossoms, which wilted down to almost nothing in the heat. The eggs were cracked on top and scrambled through the soft orange petals until the whole pan looked like a sunset folded into curds. This was a summer dish that existed only during the weeks when the calabaza vines were flowering, which made it seasonal in a way that most Mexican egg dinners were not. In the markets of Puebla, Oaxaca, and Mexico City, vendors sold the blossoms in enormous bundles that wilted by noon if you did not cook them. So the scramble was often a race against the clock. You bought the flowers in the morning, and by evening, they were eggs. Mexican-American families who kept backyard gardens in Tucson, San Antonio, and the San Joaquin Valley had their own supply. The squash vines produced more blossoms than fruit, and picking the male flowers actually helped the plant. A dozen blossoms, 2 eggs, a tortilla, and you had a dinner that tasted like the garden was still growing around you. The flavor was delicate, almost sweet, with a vegetal softness that disappeared the moment the season ended. Nobody dried them, nobody canned them. When the vines stopped blooming, you waited until next year. Number 17. Huevos con requesón. Mexican ricotta and eggs. Requesón is the soft, crumbly, fresh cheese left over from the whey after making queso fresco, and in the dairy regions of Chiapas, Oaxaca, and Michoacán, it was sold still warm at the morning market, wrapped in corn husks. Crumbled into a skillet with scrambled eggs, a little epazote, and strips of roasted poblano. It melted into soft white pockets inside the curds, giving each bite a creamy, milky richness that no aged cheese could match. The combination required no technique and no time. 2 eggs, a spoonful of requesón, and a warm tortilla made a dinner that tasted gentle and quiet after a long day. In Mexican-American neighborhoods where requesón was harder to find, some families substituted farmer's cheese or drained cottage cheese, but the flavor was never quite the same as the real thing scooped from a market stall at dawn. Number 16. Huevos con chipilín. Chipilín and eggs. Chipilín is a leafy herb that grows wild across southern Mexico and Central America, with small oval leaves and a flavor somewhere between spinach and watercress, but earthier than both. In the kitchens of Chiapas, Tabasco, and the Guatemalan border towns, chipilín went into tamales, soups, and rice. But the simplest preparation was the one that showed up at dinner time when nobody felt like cooking anything elaborate. The leaves were stripped from the stem, wilted quickly in a hot skillet with a clove of garlic, and the eggs were scrambled through until the green leaves marbled the golden curds. The taste was distinctive enough that anyone who grew up eating it could identify the herb blindfolded, and different enough from any other green that no substitute really worked. Families who migrated to Los Angeles and Houston sometimes found chipilín at the larger Latin markets, but more often they grew it in pots on the back porch, a plant from home that refused to be left behind. Number 15. Huevos con longaniza. Longaniza sausage and eggs. Longaniza is not chorizo, though Americans who have never tasted both side by side tend to confuse them. Where chorizo is ground and crumbled, longaniza is a long coiled rope of coarsely chopped pork, seasoned with vinegar, dried chiles, and regional spices that change from town to town. In the Yucatan, the sausage carried achiote and sour orange. In Toluca, it was spiced with clove, cinnamon, and black pepper. In Oaxaca, the chilies shifted again. Sliced into rounds and fried until the casing crisped and the fat rendered out, the longaniza went into a skillet with scrambled eggs that absorbed the spice drippings and turned a faint orange from the rendered fat. The eggs did not need salt because the sausage carried enough seasoning for the entire plate. In Mexican-American neighborhoods across Texas, longaniza was the sausage that the older generation asked for by name at the carniceria. while the younger generation grabbed the chorizo without knowing the difference. The coarser texture, the regional spice profile, the casing that held its shape in the pan, all of that distinguished it from its more famous cousin. A dinner of longaniza con huevo with refried beans and a stack of flour tortillas was a plate that took 15 minutes and tasted like someone had spent the afternoon seasoning meat by hand. The sausage did the work. The eggs just showed up. Number 14. Huevos con chicharrón. Pork cracklings and eggs. The chicharrón was broken into rough, uneven pieces and tossed into a skillet with salsa roja or salsa verde, where it softened and soaked up the sauce like a sponge absorbing water. Then the eggs were cracked in and scrambled through the whole mixture until everything was tangled together. The result was unlike any other egg dish in Mexican cooking. The chicharrón gave each bite a texture that shifted between tender and chewy, depending on how long it had sat in the sauce, and the salsa made the eggs taste richer than they had any right to be on their own. In Mexican markets and carnicerias from the 1950s through the 1980s, chicharrón was sold in large golden sheets or by the bagful, and it was one of the cheapest sources of protein and fat available. Families bought it by weight, and a small amount went a long way when combined with eggs and a good salsa. The dish was especially common in the states along the United States and Mexico border, where chicharrón vendors set up on street corners and outside churches after Sunday Mass, selling warm sheets that crackled when you broke them apart. For a person living alone, a bag of chicharrón kept for the whole week without refrigeration. You could break off a piece each night, cook it down in whatever salsa you had on hand, crack in your eggs, and eat well without spending much at all. What made this dish disappear from so many kitchens was not a change in taste. It was a change in supply. Fresh chicharrón requires a pork butcher who renders the skin in-house, frying it in large vats of lard until it puffs and turns golden. As supermarkets replaced neighborhood carnicerias and small butcher shops closed one by one, the supply of real, freshly fried chicharrón dried up with them. The bagged pork rinds sold in the chip aisle today are a different product entirely. They crumble instead of softening. They do not absorb sauce, and they taste more of seasoning powder than of pork. The families who remember the real thing know the difference immediately. Number 13. Huevos con hongos de llano. Field mushrooms and eggs. After the summer rains in the highlands of central Mexico, the llanos and hillsides around Puebla, Tlaxcala, and the state of Mexico erupted with wild mushrooms that families gathered in buckets and aprons. There were dozens of varieties, but the ones that ended up in the egg skillet were usually the pale, meaty hongos de llano that grew in open grassland and had a clean, earthy smell that filled the kitchen the moment they hit the oil. Sliced thick and sautéed with epazote, garlic, and a strip of chile poblano, the mushrooms released their liquid and then crisped at the edges before the eggs went in, scrambled loosely so the dark slices showed through the curds. The dish was seasonal, free, and unrepeatable, because no cultivated mushroom from a grocery store shelf tasted anything like what grew wild after the rain. Families who settled in the United States lost access to those specific hillside fungi, and with them lost a dinner that had no recipe and no substitute. Number 12. Huevos con acelgas, Swiss chard and eggs. The acelgas were stripped from their thick stems, roughly chopped, and wilted in a hot skillet with onion and garlic until they collapsed into a dark, silky tangle of greens. Then eggs were cracked directly over the top and stirred through until the curds formed throughout the leaves. In the kitchen gardens of Guanajuato, Zacatecas, and the Mexican-American communities of northern New Mexico, chard grew easily and produced leaves for months from a single planting. The green had a mild, slightly mineral flavor that paired with eggs without competing for attention. A squeeze of lime and a pinch of salt finished the plate. For someone cooking alone, a few leaves of chard from the garden and 2 eggs made a dinner that took less than 10 minutes and left nothing in the sink but one pan. Number 11. Huevos con cecina, salt-cured beef and eggs. Cecina is beef sliced thin as paper and cured with salt and sometimes chile, then air-dried or lightly smoked until it turns a deep reddish brown. In the markets of Yecapixtla, Puebla, and across the highlands of Oaxaca, cecina was draped over wooden racks in the open air, sold by the kilo, and grilled fast over coals. For a weeknight dinner, a piece was torn into strips, seared in a hot skillet until the edges curled and darkened, and then eggs were cracked over it and scrambled through so the salty, smoky shreds ran through every fold of the curds. The beef did all the seasoning. No chili, no onion, no tomato needed, because the cure had already built layers of salt and smoke into the meat. Mexican-American families who could find cecina at a specialty carniceria treated it like a luxury, using a single thin sheet to flavor a dinner for two. Number 10. Chilaquiles con huevo. Most people know chilaquiles as a breakfast dish or a hangover cure, but in many Mexican-American households, they were dinner just as often. Stale tortillas cut into triangles, fried until crisp, and then simmered in red or green salsa until they softened just enough to hold together without turning to mush. A fried egg or two went on top, the yolk running down into the sauce and the chips below. Some families added a drizzle of crema and crumbled queso fresco. Others kept it completely plain. Chilaquiles con huevo for dinner was the kind of meal nobody talked about because it felt too ordinary to mention. The sort of thing you made when you did not feel like cooking but still wanted something real. It used up leftover tortillas and whatever salsa was already made. And for someone cooking alone, it turned pantry scraps into a plate that tasted far better than it had any right to. Number 8. Huevos con chayote. The chayote is a pale green, pear-shaped squash with a single flat seed in the center that grows on sprawling vines and was once a backyard fixture across Mexico and the American Southwest. On its own, it has a mild, almost neutral flavor, but when peeled, diced, and cooked slowly with onion and a little green chili, it turns silky and takes on whatever seasonings surround it. Eggs scrambled into cooked chayote became a light, clean-tasting dinner that sat easy on the stomach, which made it a particular favorite among older cooks who wanted something filling without the heaviness of meat or beans. In the 1960s and 1970s, chayote vines grew along backyard fences and over wooden trellises in neighborhoods from Brownsville to Boyle Heights. One healthy vine could produce dozens of squash over the course of a single growing season, far more than one household could eat, so families gave the extras to neighbors, left bags of them on doorsteps, and traded them for tomatoes or chilies from someone else's garden. The squash was peeled, diced, and sautéed with garlic and onion until translucent and tender, and then the eggs were stirred gently through. Some cooks finished the dish with a scattering of cheese or a pinch of epazote. For a person living alone, one chayote and 2 eggs made a generous plate, and the remaining squash kept for days in the refrigerator without losing its texture or turning brown. Chayote lost its place in many kitchens as families moved out of houses with yards and into apartments where the vines had nowhere to climb. Grocery stores carried it only sometimes, and younger generations who never saw it growing wild on a backyard fence walked right past it in the produce section without a second glance. But in the neighborhoods where it still grows today, the people who remember know exactly what to do with it. Number 7. Huevos motuleños. This dish comes from the small town of Motul in the Yucatan Peninsula. A lightly fried corn tortilla layered with a spread of refried black beans, a fried egg with crispy edges, and a generous ladle of tomato, sauce made with habanero chile. On top of all that went slices of fried plantain and crumbled white cheese. It was a complete plate in one tall, messy stack. Huevos motuleños crossed from the Yucatan into Mexican-American kitchens in parts of Southern California and Houston, where families from the peninsula had settled and brought their recipes with them. For a person eating alone, it was a composed, layered plate that looked like it came from a restaurant kitchen, but took no more than 15 minutes to assemble from ingredients already on hand. The habanero in the sauce gave it a sharp, fruity heat that set it apart from every other egg dish on this entire list. Number 5. Moletes con huevo. A molete is a bolillo sliced open lengthwise, spread thick with refried beans, topped with cheese, and slid under the broiler until the cheese melts into golden, bubbling pools. Add a fried egg on top of that, and you have a dinner that a person living alone can put together in under 10 minutes using nothing but pantry staples. Moletes were common across Mexico as an evening snack or light supper, and in Mexican-American homes, the addition of a fried egg with a soft, runny yolk turned them into a full and satisfying meal. The yolk soaked into the mashed beans and the toasted bread beneath, and every bite delivered a different ratio of crunch, creaminess, and richness. The dish is still made in homes where someone older remembers it, but moletes never appeared on restaurant menus in the United States, which means an entire generation never encountered them. Number 4. Huevos en mole. Mole is one of the great achievements of the Mexican kitchen, a sauce that can take dozens of ingredients and hours of grinding, toasting, and simmering to build into something that no single ingredient could explain on its own. In Oaxaca and Puebla, where the tradition runs deepest, families made large batches of mole for celebrations and holidays and stored the thick, concentrated paste in clay jars for weeks afterward. On a quiet weeknight when the leftover mole sat in the back of the refrigerator, the simplest thing to do was heat a portion in a skillet, thin it with a little broth, and poach 2 eggs directly in the sauce until the whites set firm and the yolks stayed soft. Huevos en mole was never a recipe that appeared in any cookbook. It was what happened after the party was over and the mole was still there. The sauce had already been made with all of its complexity, the roasted chilies, the toasted sesame seeds, the chocolate, the fried plantain, whatever the family's particular recipe demanded. And the eggs simply absorbed everything. In Mexican-American households where someone still made mole from scratch, the leftover batches stretched through the week as huevos en mole one night, enchiladas de mole the next, and finally thinned into a soup by the end of the week. For a person living alone, a small container of homemade mole in the freezer meant several dinners that only needed 2 eggs and a tortilla to complete. The dish disappeared from regular rotation as fewer people undertook the long process of making mole at home. Without the leftover paste sitting in the kitchen, there was nothing to poach the eggs in. Store-bought mole pastes exist today, but the families who remember the real thing say the difference is impossible to miss. Number 3. Huevos con verdolagas. Eggs with purslane. Verdolagas is a succulent, tangy green that grows wild in gardens, open fields, and along roadsides all across Mexico and the American Southwest. Most people today yank it out of their yards and throw it in the trash without knowing it is one of the most nutritious edible plants that grows in this hemisphere. In Mexican kitchens, verdolagas were gathered fresh, washed carefully, and cooked down with roasted tomatillo, green chile, and garlic into a thick, saucy green stew. Eggs cracked into that stew and gently poached made a dinner that tasted like the land itself. The tangy, almost lemony bite of the purslane cut through the richness of the egg yolk in a way that no cultivated green from a grocery store could replicate. For a person living alone, verdolagas con huevo costs nothing beyond the effort of bending down to gather the greens. The dish faded as concrete and manicured lawns replaced the kitchen gardens and open lots where purslane once grew freely and abundantly. Number 2. Huevos rabo de mestiza. The name translates loosely to braid of the mestiza, and the dish is as layered as its history. Roasted poblano strips, tomato, onion, and a little cream simmered together into a thick, smoky sauce. Eggs cracked into that sauce and poached until the whites set firm around yolks that stayed liquid. In Puebla, where the dish originated, huevos rabo de mestiza appeared at dinner just as often as at breakfast. The combination of fire-roasted poblano and ripe tomato created a depth of flavor that went beyond what a standard salsa could offer. Each egg sat in its own well of sauce, and the trick was scooping it onto a tortilla without breaking the yolk. For someone eating alone, this was a one-skillet dinner that took 20 minutes and tasted like something a full kitchen had spent the afternoon preparing. Number 1. Huevos con tasajo. Tasajo is thin-cut, salted, partially dried beef from Oaxaca, where it hangs in long burgundy strips from hooks in the market stalls and the smaller mercados of the valles centrales. The meat is sliced so thin that it cooks in minutes, and its concentrated salty flavor carries a dish far beyond what fresh beef can deliver. In Oaxacan kitchens, tasajo was torn into small pieces, seared quickly in a hot skillet, and then eggs were scrambled through with a little roasted tomato and chile de agua. The result was chewy, salty, and deeply satisfying. A single strip of tasajo and 2 eggs made a complete dinner plate, and the dried meat kept without refrigeration for days. Oaxacan families who settled in Los Angeles, New York, and Chicago brought the tradition with them. For someone eating alone, tasajo con huevo was a fast, inexpensive dinner that tasted like the Oaxacan mercado itself. 25 dinners, and every single one of them started with something most people already have sitting in the kitchen. These were never emergency meals or signs of hard times. They were the cooking of people who understood that a good egg, a warm tortilla, and the right salsa could turn an ordinary evening into something that felt complete. If one of these dishes brought back the memory of someone who used to cook for you, share this video with someone who would remember it the same way. Hit that like button, subscribe if you have not already, and leave a comment telling us which egg dinner your family still makes today. We read every single one. From all of us here, thank you for watching.